Bench. Again, hello everybody for our first Bench2Market series for the 2020 to 21 academic year. My name is Cindy Sundell. I'm going to be the moderator along with Gayatri Srinivasan from Emory University for this for the first of these Bench2Market talks. Today's session is on translational funding opportunities, focusing on funding and resources for university-based commercialization ventures. And we have a really great group of panelists today. I'm going to introduce them in a moment. But before I do that, I just wanted to talk a bit about this Bench2Market series. This is a free educational series. It is hosted by Biolocity. Let me go back to the first page, by the Georgia CTSA, that's the Clinical and Translational Science Alliance, as well as the Georgia Tech Petit Institute for Bioengineering and Bioscience. And we have a very exciting series of presentations and sessions this year. I want to give a particular shout out to the next event, and that is on October 14th. We'll be talking about building a winning startup team, and the speaker is going to be Kirk Barnes. Kirk is a really fantastic speaker, a budding author, and he describes himself, he's sort of a self-described super connector. So this is going to be a really exciting and fun session, and look forward to that. Please register at the link below. So for today, I would like to introduce the panelists for today. We have a really great group of folks that represent organizations that fund technologies that are at different stages. Sorry about that. Each one is slightly different. So what I'm going to do is introduce all the folks, and then I'm going to give each person approximately 5 minutes to talk about their organization and how it works, and then we'll have time for Q&A from the audience. So I'd like to introduce first Calvin Goforth. Calvin is the founder of BIC and its Chief Executive Officer. He has extensive experience in startup company development as a founder, investor, board member, and he has played multiple executive roles. He received a BS in aerospace engineering from the University of Texas at Austin and a PhD in mechanical engineering with a minor in electrical engineering from Stanford University. He was an assistant professor in mechanical engineering for several years at the University of Arkansas, and after that he formed a company called Vector Incorporated, which had the vision to build open architecture PC-based controllers. Dr. Goforth's experience with Vector and other early stage technologies led him to found BIC Technology Venture Development. He also founded and manages the BIC Investor Network that provides seed capital into new companies that BIC forms. Manuel Kingsley is the interim managing director of Biolocity. He's an expert in medical technology, evaluation, development, and commercialization. And he has led company and technology acquisitions from BARDA Medical, in addition to guiding their strategy and development for business. He has 20 years of experience in the medical technology space, including roles in corporate business development, guiding product development, and developing growth strategy. He is the founder of Questus Healthcare, which helps organizations and physician academic inventors develop and commercialize novel medical technologies. And as I mentioned, he is now the interim director from Biolocity. I'd also like to introduce Lee Herron. Lee is known to a lot of us in the Atlanta innovation ecosystem. He is the vice president of venture development for the Georgia Research Alliance, and he directs the activities of GRA Ventures. Prior to joining GRA in 2008, Dr. Herron worked with the Enterprise Innovation Institute at Georgia Tech, and prior to that, spent many years in the startup and developing company environment. And then last and not least, I want to introduce Donna Austin. She's a program director for BARDA's Division of Research, Innovation, and Ventures at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And BARDA does have a relationship with Biolocity, and she's going to talk a little bit about that. Her work focuses on innovative products and technologies that transform health security, including novel vaccine approaches and breakthrough diagnostic solutions. Donna has directed diagnostics and detection programs with BARDA and with the Department of Defense's Chem Bio Defense program for over 30 years, and is a certified member of the Acquisition Workforce and Army Acquisition Corps. She is also a senior fellow of the Excellence in Government program. She earned chemical and biomedical engineering degrees from Johns Hopkins and the University of Maryland, and her experience includes developing in vitro diagnostics and chemical detection systems and identifying and accelerating early-stage companies to commercialization. So this is a really fine set of panelists. I'm really looking forward to their descriptions of what they do. I think I'd like to start. Is Lee? Has Lee joined us yet?
Yeah, I'm here, Cindy.
Great.
Can you
Lee,
hear me?
Yes, I do hear you. Why don't we start with you, because you do really do a lot of very early stage translational funding. So why don't we start with you?
Sure.
So for 5 minutes, give a nice an overview of GRA, the Venture Development Program.
5 minutes, sure. Well, GRA, or Georgia Research Alliance, is a 30-year-old public-private partnership that serves as its primary purpose increasing research capabilities of the state's research institutions. One of our 3 programs is the Venture Development Program, and in that program, we work with the universities, primarily their tech transfer operations, to identify technologies that have commercial potential, and then we apply resources to help them realize that potential. We tend to get involved very early, very soon after proof of concept has been demonstrated. We don't necessarily like to look at, just total blue sky projects where proof of concept has not been demonstrated, or purely conceptual evidence that the technology works as intended. We do not require incorporation for funding. In fact, we would prefer that the projects we fund in the university not be incorporated, at least initially. In fact, our funding can be used to help make that determination. Does it even make sense to form a corporation? So we're a milestone-based program. We apply funding in 3 different phases: phase 1, 2, and 3, which is not very original, but it works. Phase 1 is up to $50,000. Phase 2 is up to $100,000, and phase 3 is $250,000. There are some differences in each of those, in different requirements for each of those. Phase 1, again, that's sort of proof of concept. We want to take that initial proof of concept, extend it, and evaluate not only the technical feasibility, the market feasibility, flesh out any regulatory issues. We typically tranche our phase 1 awards into 2 to 3 phases: phase 1A, 1B, 1C, the total being $50,000. Everything we do is based on achieving milestones. So we identify commercially relevant milestones, and measure our funding tranches according to achieving those milestones. Successfully navigating phase 1 would qualify a company for phase 2 funding, or $100,000, also tranched into at least 2 tranches, an A and a B phase, typically around $50,000 each. Significant difference in phase 1 is the requirement for matching funds. For instance, if the project is to receive a $100,000 award from GRA, it must also have $100,000 from a matching source. The purpose of the match is demonstration of commercial viability. We're not necessarily worried about the scientific merit. We are much more concerned about the commercial opportunity and commercial merit. So sources of the match that we count are SBIR, STTR grants, angel funding, strategic partner funding, and venture capital funding, although typically these are at such an early stage, they're not of interest to the venture capital community. Our phase 1 and phase 2 awards are always to the university. We do not provide grants to private companies. That's prohibited by state gratuities law because our programmatic funding does come from the state. But we're glad to provide these funds to the universities to further development of the technology. The funds can be used for actually a fairly wide range of activities, including furthering the technology development, exploring the market potential, looking at IP issues, although we do not pay for patent prosecution, exploring the regulatory and reimbursement issues. Our phase 3 program is actually a loan to a company, and usually sometime during phase 2 or at the end of phase 1 or early in phase 2, those projects transition into companies. There's usually an incorporation event. Many times that's for the purpose of applying for SBIR funding. Our phase 3 program is a loan. It's up to $250,000 directly to the company. It's also awarded in tranches anywhere between 100 and 150 in the first tranche, and with the balance of the 250 being in the second tranche. And those funds are typically used for preparing for product launch, getting to a value inflection point where additional funding would be considered. They're much more mature companies than, say, typical phase 1. We accept proposals on a rolling basis. There's no defined deadline for submitting those proposals to us. We review them typically on a monthly basis. It starts with a 2-page pre-proposal, often followed by a meeting, call, or conference with the PI to go over what we'd like to see in the phase 1 proposal. Our proposals are all reviewed internally and usually sent out for external review of 2 to 3 individuals with domain expertise that advise us on the fundability of that particular project.
Great.
So I don't know. I'll be glad to take questions later.
Yep. Thank you, Lee. I think in order, we'll go next to Biolocity. So, Manuel, can you give us a high-level overview of Biolocity, please?
Thank you, Cynthia. I'm happy to do so, and thank you, Lee. So, Biolocity is a program that resides within the biomedical engineering department within Emory and Georgia Tech because it's a joint program. We span both universities, but we really serve the broader university community. So, we've historically funded, a lot of things from School of Medicine, chemistry, other areas on the Emory side, and biomedical engineering programs with mechanical engineering, computer science things coming from the tech side. About roughly a third of our projects are actually joint and have PIs on both sides. And that actually is a really good combination actually for a lot of technologies because you have clinical expertise and kind of more technical subject matter expertise as well. So we tend to follow actually GRA in many cases because or an R01 grant, the investigators have obtained and done some early proof of concept with the technology, just proven enough that it becomes appealing, and there seems to be some validity to the science that's there. Although what we're trying to do is really bridge the gap between something that has early demonstration in the lab and then take it to a point where it has the maturity and enough data and proof that it could, pique investor interest. So from our perspective, we're finding technologies that, have IP ownership from either institution or both, and that, have commercial potential. So our program actually provides funding in the form of grants, and I'll explain that process. And also, we're pretty heavy in terms of expertise and advisory. So we become a de facto commercial business team for a clinician engineer that is, an awardee of our program. And typically grants fall in the range of 100 to 300,000. That's what's historically happened. And as GRA is, we're milestone based, so we're not really as concerned with a specific amount. We're more concerned with, and this is part of our diligence, finding out what investors would want to see and able to, to be interested in funding. And we try to get the team to a point where they have, more information, more data, less risk, and it is a fundable project. So from our perspective, we're looking for investment in that typically, would be a startup that is venture funded or angel funded, or it could be a license to an established industry partner as well. So both of those things are acceptable as long as the technology, still resides within the university. So as Lee described as well, independent of company formation, what is a requirement is that the company does not have a license yet to the technology, and the investigators are still within the institutions. In terms of kind of the scope of what we look for, we're fairly broad. As long as it's patient impacting technology, we fund things in the therapeutic space, diagnostic, device, and health IT. So we have a pretty broad portfolio from that vantage point. And we work fairly closely with the teams. So our application process starts with a consultation where we meet with the teams, really understand what they're trying to achieve, and see if there's a fit in terms of the stage of maturity and the viability of the technology. And we'll invite them to apply. At that point, we'll actually start engaging in terms of helping the team prepare to present to our Oversight Committee. Our Oversight Committee is the one that it's composed of investors, industry folk, entrepreneur, and then a combination of clinicians and engineering specialties from both institutions. So we have a mixed kind of industry, academic, and investor panel, which is makes funding decisions. But we'll help them really understand and refine what is the need they're trying to fulfill, how is this technology compelling and different from what's in the marketplace, and what's the potential impact of that. So we prepare them for an initial short 5-minute presentation, and from there we'll select about 10 projects that go and pursue full funding. So that's our typical application process, and it'll span generally 4 to 5 months from when we make a call to when we make funding decisions. In addition to that, we on occasion also provide smaller seeds to technology teams. Generally, these are teams that have potential but are not necessarily at the point of maturity that are ready to apply to our program. Very similar to kind of GRA Phase 1 grant. And in certain occasions, there are projects that have a lot of commercial potential but might have a small missing piece to the puzzle, and we'll help them kind of achieve that and then potentially become successful in terms of acquiring additional funding. So to kind of round out the description of the program, a few things that we provide in addition to the money, tout to milestones, and our core business advisory. We'll advise them on quality, regulatory, reimbursement as needed. Sometimes we'll actually join them, or either on site, remotely, with potential investor and strategic discussions if they're looking for that, and or other things like product development. So we will pretty much tailor what we offer to what drives project success is kind of the short of the story. So we're a lot more involved with teams, and typically meet on a bi-weekly basis at least throughout their formal engagement process, which is typically a year. In many cases, extends to 18 months depending on the technology. Usually therapeutics need a little bit more time and maturity to be able to achieve kind of investor readiness. So I'm happy to answer any questions later on as well. Thank you, Cynthia.
Great, thank you, Manuel. Now let's go to Calvin. He has his organization has a bit of a different model, which is really interesting. So Calvin, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the IC.
Well, thank you, Cindy. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So VIC Technology Venture Development is a venture development firm that's in the business of identifying commercially promising intellectual property available for license. We have a team that we call our Opportunity Assessment Team that meets weekly, screening intellectual property from across the United States and even internationally. And When we find something of interest, we assign a lead due diligence person, and we do a very extensive vetting process for the technology. If it makes it all the way through that, then we will form a new company, typically with the inventors involved as equity participants. And of course, we exclusively license the technology into that new company. Our affiliated investor network, called the VIC Investor Network, puts the initial proof of concept capital in every new company we form. That ranges from $250,000 to $500,000. That money is really used to validate that the technology really does what we think it does, knock down some of the risk, establish that proof of concept, and position the company for substantial follow-on investment. Our own investor network also participates in the follow-on rounds, but we have a broad set of investor relationships across the country that we draw on for those follow-on rounds. Typically, when we form a new company, the managing director of the given branch office in which we're locating the company serves as interim CEO. We have several branches across the country, and we're in the process of forming a branch in Atlanta. Our starting point is always the raw technology, and our primary focus is on life science and med tech. That includes medical devices, therapeutics, and diagnostics. We stay away from IT, pure IT plays. It's all of our companies are based on very strong foundational IP. When we form the new company, as I mentioned, I think the managing directors typically serve as interim CEO. They'll typically serve in that role for 18 to 24 months to really establish some traction in that company. They're supported, and well, after 18 to 24 months, typically at that point in time, we're going to be raising the more substantial follow-on capital and recruiting in a permanent CEO. Whether it's the interim CEO or the permanent CEO, they're supported by services provided by VIC's central headquarters in Arkansas. That includes everything from accounting to HR to financial support to scientific and engineering support. That really allows our CEOs to focus on the things you want the CEOs to focus on, which are the strategic plan, the regulatory plan, the funding plan, so on. So it's proven to be a very cost-effective and versatile model. In part because of the cost effectiveness of the model and the extreme vetting process that we apply for the technologies under consideration. Our VIC Investor Network members are seeing very high returns, very high quality deal flow, and so we've launched a pretty significant expansion. We've been forming 1 to 2 new companies per year, but our plan is to be forming 10 new companies per year across the country by 2022. We would be a good potential partner for an inventor who wants to see an experienced team and experienced and broad team of resources applied to the commercialization of their technology, but who doesn't want to run their own company. So in our role, the inventors are typically technical advisors, again, the equity participants, consulting fees, subcontracts back to the university. But in the early stages of the company development, VIC is in full control, and that's how we ensure to our investor network, the high quality deal flow and kind of consistent approaches that are proving to be successful for us. So I'll stop there, and again, I'll be happy as well to answer questions later.
Thanks, Calvin. Donna, you're next. Can you describe the BARDA Drive program, please?
Yeah, hi, thanks. Thanks, everybody, and especially to Biolocity for inviting me to talk today. I'm Donna Austin. I'm a project officer with BARDA, which is the Biomedical Research and Development Authority. And BARDA is a mission-driven organization within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, which is the ASPR. First I'll start with a kind of a high-level overview of BARDA. We, again, it's a mission-oriented agency who we exist for just such a an event as we're living today, or pandemic response, preparedness and response. And our mission is to develop the medical countermeasures that would be needed by the ASPR, the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, to kind of hit the ground with emergency medical facilities, supplies, and medical countermeasures, vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, and devices that would be needed in a public health emergency, such as a pandemic or other natural infectious disease outbreak or intentional chem-bio rad nuke attack. So this is why we exist, and we're kind of living out that reality today. The thing that we never want to see is when our work is actually needed. But it's an example of why we exist. So our model, we're a government agency. We offer contract awards to developers that offer proposals to us that align with our mission needs or our mission areas of interest, which are in the diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutic space around those, those threat agents for which there's really no commercial niche. So in a way where our model is similar to what we've just heard from the other three panelists, in the sense that we kind of have always, in the 12 years I've been with BARDA, we've described ourselves, I think from very early on, as kind of a venture capital in our model approach. We do award contracts. We do require, traditionally in BARDA, we require a little bit of later stage technology readiness levels. So we're looking for beyond proof of concept. We're looking for those programs that are ready to advance their candidates through the regulatory pathway to approval. And then, we fund that final stage. So we have advanced research and development funding, and we also have Project BioShield funding and pandemic influenza funds so that we could advance relatively mid-stage, sometimes earlier stage technologies through that technology development phase and into the final regulatory clinical trials. I mean, we have contract awards from, a few $100,000 to up to hundreds of millions, depending on which funding allocation we're talking about. So I encourage everybody to learn more about it by going to our website, either PHE, publichealthemergency.gov, so phe.gov, or medicalcountermeasures.gov to learn more about BARDA and why we exist and what we do. We again, traditionally BARDA across our horizontal, mission, vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, traditionally we're looking for later stage product development, to get it to a product that could be placed in the strategic national stockpile for when it's needed. But on the verticals, I'll give you a couple of examples of some verticals in those areas. We are looking, in some cases, for more innovative products. So we are willing to look at smaller award-sized contracts for earlier stage products and technologies that could advance and become game changers in the, for example, vaccines paradigm. So when we talk about vaccination by needle and syringe, we'd like to get away from that paradigm. We'd like to someday have a needle-free, or at least not reliant on, the terrible burden that needle and syringe places on our supply chain, by developing some alternative methodologies for delivering vaccines, say a wearable skin patch or oral formulation, something novel and innovative that advances that part of our portfolio. Another area is diagnostics. We're looking at ways to bring more all-encompassing kind of agnostic diagnostic testing or wearable devices for pre-symptomatic detection of disease, infection. So those are some various verticals, just as example of where we're looking to fund those newer and earlier stage developers. So I guess with that, I don't have to repeat too much of what the other panelists have already offered. We also, in our contract, follow that. I wouldn't necessarily call it phases, but we do advance additional funding as milestones are met, and that's all wrapped into. being a government organization, we have to be aware, good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. So we're definitely looking for the right fit, the right kinds of technologies that have a good chance of making it. And with that, I'm happy to take questions when we get to that part of the program. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Donna. So we are now entering sort of the Q&A session. So I have some questions, but first I would, and I'm sure Gayatri, are you there? My co-moderator?
Yes, I managed to get in. I'm so sorry.
Yay! Okay, so I think what we'll do is turn it over to the audience to ask questions. I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment. Yeah, and if, Gayatri and I probably would have some questions also, but I'll turn it over to the audience. Anybody have questions? Christina, how does this work? Do people they can just speak up, or do we have to unmute?
Currently, there aren't any Q&A in the chat box yet.
Okay, so if people have a question, they have to enter it into the chat box. Is that how it works?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mention that to folks. So yeah, please feel free to enter some questions there. In the meantime, I have some questions. I think my first question is for Donna. Donna, can you give us some example of the types of things you have funded through BARDA Drive? And kind of related to that, what types of proof of concept are you looking for? Are you talking animal data, human data? So yeah, you could give us a little bit more on that.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So let's see. BARDA Drive is a specific program within BARDA. And as I mentioned, traditional BARDA projects are of a higher readiness level before they would, even propose and we would fund. But Drive was set up just to take a look at the pipeline of up and coming novel, innovative technologies to really kind of be that transformative push to get our products to the newer level of technology. So we're looking for example, we have 3 program areas. I'll briefly touch on them. And I hope that addresses your question, Cindy. But the 3 program areas that we're hyper-focused on within Drive are solving sepsis. So we're looking at host response, biomarkers, predictors, machine learning, and algorithm development, all the things that can make the tools for a clinical setting to have a tool, a standard mechanism to recognize sepsis in hospitalized patients, or maybe patients that have been sent home from a serious illness and can wear some device around at home to be monitored remotely, to make sure that if there's an onset of sepsis in this patient's we catch it early and can intervene early. So that's our focus on solving sepsis. It's not therapeutics side of it. It's more about the recognition, prediction of sepsis. The second hyper-focused area of interest is ENACT, early notification to act, control, and treat. And this is a program that is looking at wearable devices and apps that can be developed to understand the physiological markers, signs, symptoms of infection before the physical signs and symptoms even appear. Because the earlier we can recognize infection or something going wrong, whether it's something that would be worn on a regular basis, something that would help support a pandemic response, something that could support patients in a clinical setting by monitoring them remotely, or those that have been sent home or just can't reach a clinical setting. If there's something that they could wear, something that could remotely monitor, those signs, symptoms, host biomarkers that maybe appear in the sweat or other, breath exhalations. Just, if you can think it, we would like to hear about it, that kind of thing. And then we have a third area of interest, which is about the alternative routes of administration of vaccines, which is the example I used earlier. And we're funding several projects in this area on wearable microneedle skin patches that deliver vaccine slowly through the skin, which eliminates the reliance on needle and syringe. It also may make vaccine more acceptable, more easier for some people to take, because for one thing, needles are scary. For another thing, we can distribute this type of product in a much easier way, no cold chain required, at-home administration, potential for that. So those are some ways that DRIVE is looking to transform, the health security products that we develop.
So I guess my follow-up question, a little bit to that, I don't want to. What level of validation do you need to be considered? Because
right, you had asked that. We do look for some beyond proof of concept. So we're not starting at the very beginning here. This isn't basic research. Some data. It does not have to be human data. Obviously, that would be much later stage in a product development cycle. But some data that shows that there's a serious relationship, maybe between, in the case of a vaccine patch, let's say there's a relationship, a collaboration that's been established with the developer of the technology and a vaccine developer, so that there's a real project there that could be moved into, say, a preclinical model to demonstrate early efficacy, early, success of delivery of the vaccine. So those are some of the things that, we want to show. We want to see that a project has a serious, prospect.
Great. Well, thank you. Gayatri, do you have a question?
Yeah, there's a question that was in the Q&A. It's generally applicable to any of the panelists. Does any of your organization offer expertise or assistance in standards compliance like FDA, NIOSH, ASTM, ISEA? I know Biolocity does offer a bit, but I don't know how much. I know for FDA it may have some, but I would love to hear any of the panelists refer to.
So I just posted a brief response in the chat. We do. That's one of the core areas we look at as regulatory, because all our programs are, healthcare related. Standards then become, a subset of either regulatory or quality, as they pertain to very specific aspects of product development. So that is a consideration, and it is pretty much a part of every project that we look at is what is the regulatory and standards implication in the development process, right?
This is Lee, Cindy, and typically what we do, while we don't, we're very thinly staffed, we don't have that regulatory expertise in-house, but our funds are oftentimes used to engage consultants, whether they be for regulatory purposes, quality systems purposes, or reimbursement purposes. So that's an acceptable use of GRA funds.
Great. And any other? Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, the same goes for BARDA. We typically a contractor or an offerer would come with a consultant on their team, and that's what we look for. But we also have in-house experts in regulatory and quality affairs who participate on our project teams and kind of help that process along.
I have a question for Biolocity. When does your next call go out for proposals? It's not rolling, right, Manuel? Is there a certain date?
So that's typically we open our funding, kind of request in November. I think this is not formal yet. Most likely our funding round will open in January this time around. To a great degree, COVID has impacted the team's abilities to work in the lab, and therefore slightly delayed some of our current projects. And now as folks return to campus more actively, we believe that time will really resonate more with investigators.
Good, great. Look forward to hearing about that. Gayatri, do you have any other?
Yeah, there is another question in the Q&A. As an entrepreneur, how can I work with your accelerator network to get access to BARDA funding? So I think it's for Donna.
And I'll also open it up to Manuel with Biolocity. But so we encourage applicants, especially those who are sort of in the startup community and aren't familiar with approaching the government for funding. And we encourage you to work with our accelerators, such as Biolocity. We have a partnership with 13 accelerators located throughout the country in various geographic regions, but any of them would be willing to speak with you about your technology and whether it's a good fit. I think all the panelists we heard from today kind of have those same verticals in life science and biotech, vaccine therapeutics and diagnostics. So they're probably all very familiar with and could understand that your technology would or would not align with our areas of interest. Our accelerators are familiar with our solicitations. We have open solicitations posted. And I forgot to mention that in addition to the regular work that we do, every day, obviously COVID-19 has consumed us since February, and we're part of Operation Warp Speed to develop a COVID vaccine and other medical countermeasures. So that in itself is a special instruction area of interest. So our accelerators are very familiar with how to navigate through those solicitations, whom to reach out to ask questions within the BARDA organization. So it's a great service. It's a two-way service. The accelerators help us by finding companies and bringing them to us already, having been vetted, and the companies can benefit as well from working with the accelerators.
Thanks.
Thank you, Donna. And Cynthia, I just wanted to compliment quickly. So for folks in our region, and I assume the people on the call are, in our local area, the first step would be to request a consultation with us through our website. And we will, meet with teams, orient them, and we'll also, kind of pass on that information to BARDA as a, routinely, on a regular basis. In addition to, trying to contact folks that have technologies in these spaces that Donna mentioned earlier as well. So, we do a little bit of both. But that's the best place to start, is request just a consultation on our website.
We have another question here from the audience. Where do people start if they are not part of a startup group? Do we take an idea to our University Office of Technology, tech transfer first, or is a submission there more likely to succeed with the help of one of your groups? I'll put that out to our panel, and I have some thoughts there too, but anybody like to answer that? This is more kind of specific to Georgia Tech and Emory.
If Cynthia, you'd like me to comment on that, I think Gayatri's answer is on point. If this is technology that's being developed within the university, the first step is the disclosure to tech transfer. And then from there, they will orient, folks that have entrepreneurial aspirations. We would do the same. I just caution that, you really can't disclose publicly before you file disclosures and file provisional. So OTT is definitely the first step.
Absolutely.
And I'll comment as well. I guess I'm the only person here representing a private investment group. Our starting point is working with tech transfer offices. So that's where we go. Now, sometimes we'll have an inventor approach us directly. And if it sounds of interest to us, we'll make sure that they are talking to their tech transfer office, before we before we go very deep with them. But
yeah, and if I'll speak for Georgia Tech, we, again, the first step would be if it's something patentable, it would certainly be a submission of an invention disclosure and then getting a provisional patent filed before you speak publicly about your technology. And then we have something called Venture Lab at Georgia Tech. We work very closely with the Tech Transfer Office and provide guidance and access to mentors and serial entrepreneurs to kind of help with the commercialization process. I believe Emory has something similar as well.
Yeah, this is Lee. We're somewhat independent. I mean, we work with Venture Lab at Georgia Tech, the Tech Transfer Office at Georgia Tech, as well as OTT at Emory University, and consistent with what you've heard, previously, we would advise consulting with Tech Transfer initially, just to determine whether or not an invention might be potentially patentable or what other protection might be available. We consider all kinds, there are many different types of IP. Patents, patent applications are one, but also copyright, trademark, trade secret, which is a little bit difficult in the university setting, but nonetheless, can be done. But just to get an understanding, and that would be the starting point. At Georgia Tech, there is Venture Lab. At Emory University, their contact, at least our contact, is embedded within the tech transfer operation. It's a guy by the name of Kevin Lee, and he's very accessible and easy to, will make himself available.
Great. Do we have any other? Let me see.
Yeah, there is another question. I have been developing an AI model of human behavior. I'm sure it's patentable. It could be tuned to, say, help people to readily accept vaccines by combating disinformation about them. I'm still a student in Georgia Tech, and I'm not based in the US. Any advice?
Are you an undergrad or a graduate student? That would be kind of my first question. If you're an undergrad, the intellectual property would be handled differently. As an undergrad, you would own the intellectual property. If you're a graduate student, in the case of Georgia Tech, Georgia Tech would be the owner of that IP, and we would assist in, filing a provisional and give some kind of patent strategy. If you're a student at Tech, we have a program called CreateX that might be very useful for you to join. That's for undergraduates. It helps with doing customer discovery and business model development, and it can provide also some funding for intellectual property filing. So I would suggest that you look into that program. Do we have? I know if that answers.
A graduate student doing OMSCS.
Okay, I don't know what OMSCS is. So if you are a graduate student, and this is part of the work that you're doing at Georgia Tech and Georgia Tech Research, then if you have something that is potentially patentable, you would want to submit that invention disclosure to the Tech Transfer Office. And I'm happy to talk to you as a principal in Venture Lab about your technology. We can do that offline. So my contact information, I'll provide that at the end.
I have a follow-up question for Vic. This is regarding what kind of typical funding amount. I know you did mention in your introduction that you did do milestone-based tranches of money, infusions into the startup. I wanted to understand, if you say tranches, is there like a higher limit or a lower limit to that tranche? What is, if you can give any guidance on that.
Sure. So Vic's initial funding into any new company that we form to commercialize intellectual property is between $250,000 to $500,000. and that depends on the particular needs of that company to reach what we would consider a proof of concept that would position that company for follow-on investment. Then on the follow-on rounds, which range up to several $1 million, the VIC Investor Network itself is only investing typically a few $100,000 as part of that follow-on round. But we continue to participate in the follow-on rounds, just at a relatively modest percentage of most of those follow-on rounds. But the founding capital round is always $250,000 to $500,000. It's just because for us to really establish proof of concept, it's very rare to find technology that for us to establish the level of proof of concept that we want is going to take less than $250,000. And the $500,000 limit is more just because typically, it is enough to knock down some risk. If it needs more than $500,000, then we're probably going to put the technology into our incubator and seek government grant funding to do the initial proof of concept.
Great. I have a question, a general question for all of you. Is there a time horizon to market and/or profitability that you need to see in a business plan to fund a venture? And maybe we can start with Calvin. What are your?
Sure. So we actually will start with technologies at any stage. We started from nothing but a concept on paper, not even a provisional patent filed, just a concept on paper, and taken a concept on paper all the way to market and to exit. But in terms of the time horizon, when we do our due diligence process, we're looking for things that we think we can exit in 5 to 8 years. So we have a pretty long time horizon, but if it's more than 8 years to exit, so like for therapeutics, if we don't think we can have an exit at the end of phase 1 or beginning of phase 2, then we probably wouldn't take on that particular therapeutics candidate, because we're not looking to take it all the way to market. We're looking to sell the company to a larger biotech pharma company at that stage, and so that's part of our evaluation process as well. But 5 to 8 years is our typical time frame. Now, we have had exits faster than that, but that's typically what we're targeting.
Thanks. Any other questions? Gayatri, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I was thinking, we always talk about presentation is you get only 5 minutes or 10 minutes to present, and it's how you perform. It's a performance, right? So what do you like to see in your investor pitch? Like, what is it that makes it or breaks it?
I don't know, were you addressing that to anyone in particular?
Anybody, just, yep.
For us, I'll answer just specifically to Vic. We're different because we're not investing in established companies. We're investing in building companies from the raw technology all the way up. So for us, it's really is the technology. When we do due diligence, is it a differentiated enough technology to drive adoption within a large market? We're not looking at things like, is the management team high quality and stuff, because we're going to put all that in place. So for us, it's all about the market opportunity, the time frame, the amount of money required, the intellectual property foundation, freedom to operate, patentability, and so on, and also whether it matches our own internal areas of expertise.
So Calvin, do you, would the tech transfer, like a licensing officer, be presenting the technology to you in this format, or do you just, or are you the one that just looks, identifies the interesting IP, and then you ask these questions of the tech transfer office, or how does that work? Does anyone actually pitch?
So we have a combination of approaches. So we have a lot of tech transfer offices that are sending us intellectual property. Hey, this may fit your model, have a look at, and we'll review the initial opportunity. So we bring it to our opportunity assessment team, which meets weekly. And then if it's of interest, then typically fairly early on, we want to ask the inventor for a presentation, and we'll give them a brief outline again of the topics that we like to cover in that technology presentation. So that's a fairly early step on, but we always start with whatever's the disclosure, patents under non-disclosure agreement, of course, but patents that have been filed and stuff that we get from the tech transfer.
Manuel, how about with Biolocity? Oh, Donna, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh no, I was just gonna I was gonna add the flip side to what Calvin just presented. And putting on my traditional BARDA hat, we would not be interested in funding. We actually cannot, by congressional mandate, fund something that's a brand new concept, written up on paper. We actually do look for that management team. We're looking for that expertise level, the certain technology readiness level as demonstrated by product maturity data. So that's the kind of traditional BARDA lens, looking, something that's been through VIC for about 5 years and is ready to graduate. So we would transition. But in earlier stage products that drive program within BARDA, again, we're just a small piece of BARDA, but we are innovation focused. So we do have a little bit more of a look at companies that are earlier stage than traditional BARDA would fund. But still, beyond concept, we're not NIH, we're not doing bench level basic research. So beyond, the very, very beginning level, we want to see that, you've advanced, you've generated some interest in the investment community, perhaps. You have some investment behind you, some capital going for you, that you could even offer a cost share portion. Just something that indicates that you're a serious entity. So in that respect, we'd like to see those graduates that come out of these earlier stage programs.
Lee, can you comment?
Yeah, to get back to Gayatри's question about, we don't really look at just a single pitch. We typically get involved. We're sort of like Calvin, although we do like to see some proof of concept data. But we work with teams typically in an iterative process over the course of, 2 or 3 visits to fund projects. We're not looking for a single pitch, and fund. And so we place less emphasis on that. What we want to do is see, number one, good science. That's a criteria. And we want to see the opportunity, a market. We're not looking for venture capital returns or anything like that, because we're funded, or at least our programs are funded by the state. What we're looking for is the opportunity to create startups and thereby employ individuals in startups. So that's sort of the metric against which we are measured. Typically for us, it starts with good science. We're not necessarily concerned about we are not concerned about a well-formed management team right out of the box when we fund. We want to know that the founders are receptive to bringing on a management team at the right time.
Great, thank you. It looks like we are coming up on the hour. So let me see if we have any more unanswered questions from our audience. It doesn't look like it. I'd like to.
There is one, I'm sorry. It says, at what stage after POC are your biotech startups looking to bring non-technical team members, that is for chief business officers, strategic management, etc.? And does your services offer a matchmaking service for this purpose?
So I think Cynthia will address that, Manuel, Biolocity side. So we start actually fairly early trying to identify, business potential business partners for folks. That being said, we're not matchmaking. We're more helping the team figure out what the right match is. And in part, we do that through getting folks to provide informal advice and let that relationship build kind of organically. And if we have any gaps, we'll bring in folks that can help us answer those questions on a ad hoc basis, volunteer basis. And from there, many times that partnership forms, and then there's a startup. So very early is kind of the answer to that, but not. We don't lead that. We entice the team to try to take the lead on.
Yeah, this is Lee. I'll speak to sort of where in our funding scheme we like to see management or the non-technical founders sort of not necessarily step aside, but bring on additional team members with more experience in the business aspects of growth. And that's typically when companies proceed from our phase 2 grant funding to our phase 3 loan program. We want to see someone other than the technical founders involved in the company. In our experience, which goes back over 10 years now, startup companies, it's very difficult to get investment funding, institutional funding in the absence of some skilled management. It's just not going to happen. We don't fund hobbies. In other words, where there's a faculty member or a graduate student as a team, and then there's a reluctance to bring anyone else on. We don't do that. We like to see a receptiveness to bringing on appropriate stage-specific management. And we can provide some introductions. We don't operate a formal matchmaking service per se, but we've got a network of individuals that we like to introduce projects to as part of our review process. And then, and sometimes those do evolve into sort of, consultant management relationships.
Yeah, I'd also like to mention at Georgia Tech Venture Lab, we have a venture mentor network, and we actually hold monthly mentor luncheons where early stage companies can present to mentors. And, these are serial entrepreneurs and investors, and that's also a good way to connect with folks. So I'd like to thank, we're a bit beyond the hour. I want to thank the panelists. This was really excellent. I want to be mindful of your time, but just thank you. And I do want to just share my screen. Let me see if I can, where we have working. Doesn't seem to be right now. I don't. Can people see this? I have a slide on how to contact BARDA. So if you're interested, can people see this?
No.
I don't think so.
Okay. All righty. Sorry about that. Sorry, I'm having some difficulty with that. Sorry about that. And I would encourage people to contact me at Georgia Tech if you need further information on contact information. That would be cynthia.sundell@ibb.gottech.edu. And I'd just like to thank everybody, and thanks again. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.